My sister cheated and got pregnant by my husband. Our parents sided with her. I've tried many times to push this story to the back of my mind, but it keeps surfacing. The events are painful and exhausting, and some memories feel as fresh and raw as if they happened yesterday. 4 years ago, I met a man who seemed to be everything I had been looking. I fell hard, faster than I thought possible, and for a while, everything felt perfect. Every glance he threw my way, every kind word he said, made me feel cherished and safe in ways I hadn't experienced. I was madly in love with him, or at least with the person I thought he was. Those first 2 years were blissful. My friends would tease me, saying I was walking around with stars in my eyes, lost in some dreamy world, and I was. Every day felt brighter with him. The little things he did, like bringing me my favorite coffee just because he knew I'd had a long day, or holding my hand in public as though he wanted the whole world to know I was his, made me feel like the luckiest person alive. I had been in relationships before, but they had never been like this. With him, I felt whole, seen, understood, and in return, I thought I understood him too. I believed we were building something unbreakable, a bond that could weather any storm. But then came that Christmas. I remember the excitement of bringing him home to meet my family, imagining how well he'd get along with it. My sister and I had always been close, or so I thought, and she was the person I was most excited to introduce him to. I had told her all about him, about the little ways he made me happy, and I thought that she would be happy. I thought it would be a wonderful Christmas, the kind you see in movies where everyone is laughing, sharing stories, and just being together. Instead, it turned into a nightmare. The moment I caught them, there was this crushing sensation in my chest, as though my entire world had been ripped apart in an instant. I can still picture the scene, even though I've tried countless times to block it out. There they were, my boyfriend and my sister, locked in an embrace that left no room for doubt. I felt the blood drain from my face, my pulse pounding in my ears. It was as if time slowed down, and I was frozen, unable to move, speak, or even breathe. Everything I thought I knew, everything I trusted, crumbled in that one heart-wrenching moment. How could she, my own sister, someone I trusted with my life, and how could he, the man who swore he loved me? After that, things went by in a blur. My ex, well, he wasn't my ex immediately. He tried to apologize, insisted it was a mistake, a lapse in judgment, that it didn't mean anything, but those words only made it worse. If it meant nothing, then why betray me like that? I couldn't understand it, couldn't find any sense in what had happened. He begged for another chance, said he'd do anything to make it right, but I knew I could never look at him the same way again. The trust, the respect, the love I thought we shared was tainted. How could I ever believe him after something like that? 3 months later, I received more news that shattered whatever was left of my faith in the people I love. My sister was pregnant, 3 months along, meaning the affair had started before that Christmas, or at least sometime around then. I felt betrayed all over again, realizing that the cheating hadn't been a one-time mistake, as he had tried to convince me. It had been a choice, one that both he and my sister had made, fully aware of the consequences, and soon they were expecting their first child together. The betrayal deepened, spreading into every interaction with my family. With time, my family's stance softened. They were overjoyed when the baby arrived, ready to embrace my sister and her new family with open arms. I watched as they all rallied around her, as if everything was suddenly forgiven because of a new life brought into the world. Eventually, she and my ex-husband had another child, solidifying their status as a family unit in everyone's eyes. My parents, my extended family, everyone seemed willing to brush the betrayal aside, their attention solely on the children. They're innocent, they'd say, and I believed that too. I would never wish my pain upon those children, but I couldn't stand to be around them for too long. To see my sister, my ex, and the family I had loved acting like we were just one big, happy family. Over the years, I learned to keep my distance. I still attended family gatherings now and then, mostly because I didn't want to lose the connection with everyone else, but I kept a safe, emotional distance. My relationship with my sister was strained beyond repair. We'd exchange polite greetings, share small talk about inconsequential things, and then part ways as though we were mere acquaintances. There was a part of me that still felt the sting of betrayal every time I looked. While the sharp edge of the pain had dulled over time, a lingering ache remained. But last weekend, my world was thrown off balance once again. My mother had asked me to come home, saying it was urgent, though she hadn't given any specifics. When I arrived, I found both of my parents waiting, and from the look in their eyes, I knew it was serious. They looked at me with a mixture of sadness and disappointment, emotions that immediately made me feel uneasy. I remember the silence stretching, thick and uncomfortable, until my mother finally spoke. "We're disappointed in you," she said, her voice a mixture of accusation and hurt. For a moment, I was speechless, unsure of what she could possibly mean. Disappointed in me? What had I done? Then she explained, "They were upset with me for not warning them about my ex's true nature. She told me that he had been abusive toward my sister. The words barely registered. It felt like someone had pulled the ground out from under me. I tried to process this shocking revelation, to understand how the kind, gentle man I had loved could possibly be the monster they described. And then my sister walked into the room. Her face was swollen, her lip was cut, and she had bruises I couldn't ignore. In that moment, everything felt surreal. The man who had once held my hand, looked at me with love, and shared dreams with me had done this to her? After leaving my parents' house that day, I tried to collect myself, to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions raging inside me. I replayed every moment of that conversation over and over, trying to see if I had missed any clues, any way that things could have turned out different. But the more I thought, the more hopeless it all seemed. There was no easy answer. My family's anger and accusations, my sister's visible pain, and my own sense of betrayal all blended into a storm I couldn't escape. That night, I barely slept, haunted by the image of my sister's bruised face and the realization that her life had become a nightmare at the hands of the man who once claimed to love me. When morning came, I still couldn't shake the numbness. My parents' harsh words echoed in my mind, accusing me of hiding the truth, of somehow being complicit in my sister's suffering by not warning her. I knew it was irrational, but I couldn't help but feel guilty, wondering if, on some level, I had failed her. Was there something I could have done different? Could I have warned her, saved her from the pain she was now enduring? These questions gnawed at me, deepening the already vast chasm between me and the family I once leaned on for support. By midday, I decided to reach out to my mother, hoping that, with some time to cool down, she might be willing to talk. I sent a text, explaining that I never suspected he could be abusive, that I had only known him as a loving, considerate partner. I tried to make her understand that he might have hidden his true nature from me, that sometimes people only reveal who they truly are under certain circumstances. Marriage, parenthood, stress. My relationship with him hadn't been the same as my sister. I hadn't been reliant on him, nor was there a family dynamic to complicate things. Maybe that was the difference. I sent that text, hoping for some kind of understanding, maybe even some forgiveness, but the reply I received was anything but comforting. My mother's response was immediate, her anger clear. She wrote back that my attempts at explanation only made things worse, that I sounded like I was trying to excuse his actions, or worse, that I was somehow suggesting my sister was to blame for how he treated her. Her words stung, each one like a slap in the face. She accused me of hiding the truth about him from the family, of choosing not to warn my sister, of lying about my ignorance just to save myself from shame. Did you think you were somehow better than your sister? That he treated you well because you're different? She wrote. I could barely believe what I was reading. The implication that abuse had anything to do with the victim's worthiness or character was absurd. And yet here she was, accusing me of such an ugly belief. Did she think I actually believed that better women somehow avoided abuse? That I had been spared because of some imagined superiority? My blood boiled at the accusation, and I found myself typing a furious response without even thinking. What a disgusting thing to say, I texted back, my hands trembling with rage. The words were sharp, cold, and I sent them before I could even consider the consequences. But almost as soon as I hit send, a wave of regret washed over me. I knew the message would only push her further away, would deepen the divide that was already growing between us. I had allowed my anger to get the best of me, and now I was left feeling even more isolated, with no way to take back what I had said. And just like that, I found myself entirely cut off. No response from my mother, no answer when I tried to call her, nor any reply to the apology texts I sent after. My father, who I normally spoke to almost every day, was silent as well. Caught in the middle of a family feud he probably didn't want to be a part of. It was as though, overnight, I had become an outsider, an unwelcome reminder of a past no one wanted to acknowledge. The silence was crushed, a constant reminder of the widening gap between me and the family I had once been so close to. For days, I wallowed in a pit of guilt and helplessness. I spent hours researching, reading about abusive relationships, trying to understand why my ex could have been so different with me than he was with my sister. I read stories, personal accounts from women who had experienced similar things, and I found myself haunted by the idea that abusers often hide their true nature from everyone but their chosen victim. I learned about the complexities of abusive dynamics, how some people only reveal their darker sides under certain pressures, or when they feel a sense of control over their partner. But no matter how much I read, I still couldn't fully grasp how someone could change so drastically, or how I had failed to see any signs. I wanted to explain all this to my family, to share what I'd learned, to try to make them understand that I hadn't known. I thought maybe, if they saw how much effort I was putting into understanding, they'd realize I wasn't lying, that I wasn't hiding anything from them. But as each day passed without any word from my parents, my hope faded. My mother's words still echoed in my mind, her accusations piercing through any attempt I made to justify myself. And worse, I found myself wondering if, on some level, she might be right. Should I have known? Should I have sensed something? Seen some sign that would have warned me of the man my ex truly was? I tried reaching out to my father, hoping he might be more receptive, that he might listen without judgment. But he too was silent. The connection we had once shared, the daily phone calls, the easy conversations about everything and nothing, had been replaced by a void that left me feeling lost. My heart ached, torn between the guilt of not having known, the anger at being unfairly blamed, and the overwhelming sadness of being abandoned by the people I thought would stand by me no matter what. In a moment of desperation, I even tried reaching out to my sister. I knew it was risky, that she might react badly, but I couldn't shake the need to explain myself, to tell her that I was as shocked as she was, that I had never suspected he could be the way he was with. I wanted her to know that I hadn't knowingly let her walk into a trap, that I would have warned her if I had known, but I was met with cold hostility. She fired back, accusing me of arrogance, of thinking I was somehow better than her, just because he had treated me different. "Do you think you're some saint?" she wrote. "That he didn't hurt you because you're special?" The bitterness in her words was palpable, each sentence laced with resentment and hurt. It was as though she needed someone to blame for her misery, someone to direct her anger at, and I was the most convenient target. Her accusations left me speechless, stunned by the depth of her animosity. I tried to explain, to tell her that I had been as blindsided as she was, that I had never seen this side of him, but she refused to listen, her anger overwhelming any attempt at understanding. After that conversation, I felt completely alone. My family, the people I had once relied on for support, had turned their backs on me, leaving me adrift in a sea of guilt and confusion. I knew logically that I hadn't done anything wrong, that I couldn't have known what kind of person he truly was. But the accusations, the insinuations, the cold silence from my parents, all of it gnawed at me, wearing down my confidence, leaving me questioning everything I thought I knew about myself. Update. Hello again. Thank you for the outpouring of support and guidance you all offer. I truly didn't expect such a response, and I apologize for going silent after posting. I was exhausted and ended up falling asleep, and by the time I logged back on, the post was locked. But in those moments of silence and reflection, I took comfort in knowing that others understood, that people cared enough to respond. For the first time in a while, I didn't feel so alone in this. I read every comment and answered as many private messages as I could, though there were so many I couldn't get to everyone. It was overwhelming in the best way possible, a lifeline during a time when my heart felt so heavy, I didn't know how I'd carry on. Many of you gave me the advice I needed to hear, that it's time to cut ties with my family, that holding on to people who so easily disregarded my pain isn't worth. After reading your words, I realized I was holding on more out of fear than love. Fear of truly being alone, of losing the foundation of family I once depended on. But I know now that it's time to let go. Deep down, I knew this moment would come eventually. I have never been able to completely forgive my family for accepting my sister's betrayal, for welcoming her and her husband back into their lives with such open arms. And yet I understood why they did it. I knew they wanted to be present in the lives of their grandchildren, and I could never hold that against them. The children, after all, are innocent in all of this. They deserve love and support from their family, and I didn't want to be the one who denied them that. But at the same time, my parents' acceptance of my sister's betrayal felt like a wound that never healed. Their forgiveness, to me, felt like a denial of my own hurt, a dismissal of what had happened. It was as though they were telling me, it's time to get over it, to let go of the grudge. For years, I tried to balance this inner conflict. I wanted to be the bigger person, to be the one who forgave and moved forward. I tried to attend family gatherings, to smile and pretend everything was fine. I kept a polite distance from my sister, refusing to let her back into my life but keeping the peace for the sake of everyone else. And aside from my brother, who has been my one constant in all of this, I felt estranged from him. He was the only one who seemed to understand, the only one who didn't judge me for holding on to the pain. With him, I didn't feel like an outsider in my own family. Several people also questioned why my family didn't view my sister's husband as a red flag from the very beginning. It's something that's haunted me as well. The question I couldn't avoid asking my mother. Didn't it bother you that he cheated with my own sister? Her response was nothing short of a disappointment. She brushed off my concerns, telling me that it was time to move on, that holding on to these old hurts only made me bitter. There was no real answer, no acknowledgement of the betrayal, only a thinly veiled attempt to make me feel guilty for not letting it go. I was stunned, realizing that my pain, my feelings, didn't matter to her as much as keeping up appearances. Understanding my sister's perspective, her pain, her anger, her unwillingness to believe anything I said, was one of the hardest realizations I'd come to. Her experiences with him were a world apart from mine, and in her place I could see how she might feel betrayed. To her, he showed only cruelty, while with me, he had been someone else entirely. Perhaps, in a twisted way, she thought I had lied or misled her, setting her up for heartbreak by painting him as this ideal part. She was in a vulnerable place, trapped in a cycle of violence and manipulation, unable to see clearly, unable to find a way out. Knowing all of this, I decided to try one last time. I had received so many messages from other women who had been through similar abuse, sharing their stories and telling me how their partners also transformed from loving to hurt, sometimes almost overnight. These women understood my confusion, and some even gave me permission to share their words. I gathered screenshots of these stories, thinking that if my sister saw that others had experienced the same kind of betrayal, she might start to understand that the fault didn't lie with her, that this man had probably always been what he was. I poured my heart into explaining everything in a series of messages. I wanted her to know that I had nothing but empathy for her, that I understood she was hurting. I pointed out that our relationships with him were vastly different. I didn't rely on him financially, didn't share children or a household with him, and maybe those factors had allowed his abusive tendencies to stay hidden. I sent around 30 messages on Instagram, detailing everything, hoping that even if she didn't respond, some part of it might reach her. 3 hours later, her response came, but it was not the one I had hoped. All she sent was a single furious message. "I know that you are sleeping with him, you fucking were." And then, she blocked me. I felt a strange numbness. I didn't even cry this time. Maybe I had finally reached the end of my capacity for grief over this, or maybe it was the realization that I had done all I could, that my sister simply didn't want or couldn't accept the truth. She had turned me into the villain of her story, someone she could direct her pain and anger toward. And as heartbreaking as it was, I knew there was no more I could do. The following day, my brother, the only family member who had consistently supported me, reached out and asked to meet. He came by after work, his expression grave. He told me that my sister had forwarded all the messages I'd sent to the rest of the family, twisting my words into something hateful. She was apparently raging about my supposed betrayal, painting me as the source of her misery. My parents were furious, angry that I had, in their words, distressed her more than she already was. They didn't see my attempt to help as genuine. Instead, they only saw my actions as deepening her pain. My brother urged me to cut my losses and lay low, his voice calm but filled with a kind of sadness. He told me, "You can't help her because she just wants someone to blame." His words struck a chord, and I finally began to see the full picture. My sister was hurting, trapped in a life she couldn't control, and in her mind, blaming me somehow made it easier to cope with the pain. It was a bitter realization, but it helped me understand why she continued to direct her anger toward me instead of facing the reality of her situation. As my brother continued, he revealed something that shook me. From what he'd managed to piece together, her husband had begun abusing her very early in their relationship, almost as soon as she became pregnant with their first child. He had wanted her to terminate the pregnancy, and when she refused, the abuse started. She had been living in fear and suspicion ever since, growing more paranoid with each passing day. She feared he would cheat on her, and somehow, in her mind, I became the biggest threat. She thought that because I was single, I might try to take him back, and she convinced herself that I was waiting for him, even though nothing could be further from the truth. It didn't help that he would cruelly compare her to me, telling her that he was gentler with me because, in his words, I wasn't a cheap **re. He fed her insecurities, fueling her jealousy and anger toward. My brother also revealed that she had recently found a secret Instagram account of his, one where he followed several women, including me. This discovery had likely pushed her over the edge, feeding her worst fears. Hearing all of this shattered whatever lingering hope I had. I couldn't imagine the depth of her hurt, the constant humiliation, and the paranoia that must consume her daily life. It hurt me deeply to know that my sister, once someone I trusted, had been twisted into someone who hated me, all because of this man who had wreaked havoc on both our lives. But as much as I wanted to help her, I knew I was powerless. I couldn't save her from herself, from her choices, or from the man she had chosen to build a life with. As my brother sat beside me, I felt an overwhelming sense of finality. I had reached the end of the road. My sister refused to leave him, even though our parents had offered her support and a place to stay. She was choosing to stay, either because she felt she had no other choice or because the fear of starting over was too great. My family had aligned themselves with her, their anger and disappointment directed squarely at me, the daughter who had, in their eyes, failed to move on and caused unnecessary distress. I looked at my brother, and he nodded, understanding the decision I hadn't yet spoken. It's time to cut ties, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. The words felt heavy, but also freeing, like letting go of a weight I'd carried for far too long. I realized that staying connected to my family, trying to bridge the gap, was only deepening my own wounds. I had lost my sister a long time ago, and now it seemed I had lost the rest of my family too. Trying to hold on to them was only breaking me further. I made my decision that day. I would cut off contact, not out of anger, but out of a need to protect myself, to finally start healing. I couldn't keep fighting a battle I had already lost. My family had made their choice, and as much as it hurt, I knew I had to make mine. I would no longer reach out, no longer try to explain or justify myself. I would walk away, leaving behind the people I had once called my own.